Is Kiddushin Daf Tes Zayin, 16, 16a. We are near the top, fifth line from the top. So we're now moving on to the next piece of the Mishnah. The Mishnah said to be shtar, that you can acquire a servant, a Eved Ivri, through a contract, through a document. Minala, what's the source? Amar Allah. Amar Kra, the Torah says, "Imacheres yikachlo," if he takes another wife. When this is talking about a man who marries his female servant. And then it goes on to say, "Macheres yikachlo," if he takes another wife, then he has to continue to support the first wife. So hikisha kos lacheres. So there's some comparison between this servant wife and the new wife. Macheres mikne bishtar, just as the new wife is a regular free woman who can be, as we've seen, can be acquired, can be married through a contract. So too, it's the same kind of mechanism for marriage for the servant. So that makes sense if you say, who's writing this contract? If it is the master who's writing it, then it's parallel to the husband writing a contract for the wife. But what about the view that it's the father who is selling his minor daughter? If you say that the father is the one that writes the contract, so like on behalf of the woman, so then it's not parallel, right? Because in the case of a regular marriage, it's the husband who writes it. And here it's the agent, the father, who's the agent of the woman who writes it, Michael Mamar. So how can you compare the two? Diidmar. What is this? What's the source for this dispute? Raisa says, who writes the contract for a marriage of a female servant? We have a dispute: is it the husband or the father on her behalf? So makes sense according to Rav Huna, who says it's the husband who writes it, because then you can compare it to the regular marriage, and you can say, yes, just as a shtar can affect the regular marriage, it can affect the marriage of a servant. Rav Chisda Michael Mamer, but it doesn't make sense according to Rav Chisda, who says it's the father who writes the contract. Now Rav Achabar Yaakov, Rav answers, Amar Kra, according to Rav Chisda, it's from a pasuk. Lo tetzei ketzei savadim. She does not get freed. She doesn't leave the servitude like ordinary slaves, ordinary servants. So yes, she's not freed in the same way, but she is acquired. It implies she's acquired in the same way. My new star. So what does the Torah mean? Let's say it means that she can be acquired through a contract. Why are you saying that she can be acquired like what is the other way she could be acquired through a contract? You could say no, she can be acquired like the way that you acquire an Eved Kanani, a non-Jewish slave, which is chazaka, through exercising some kind of ownership. For example, if you have the slave do something, do some manual labor for you, right? Maybe that's the way she's acquired. So the Gemara says, no, we wouldn't look at it that way. Why? Because the Torah says, you can inherit, you can give your slaves through inheritance to your children after you. Osam b'chazaka, v'lo acher b'chazaka. So it says osam, them, those Kanani slaves, you can deed to your estate, to your children, v'lo acher b'chazaka. But this chazaka, the way of transferring ownership, does not apply to someone else. And who is the someone else? It's the Amma Ivriya. Ve'ema osam bishtar v'loachar bishtar. Oh, wait a minute. So again, you could say, like, if you're going to exclude something, exclude the shtar. Maybe the idea is that this is telling you that an Amma Ivriya cannot be married with a contract, right? Same kind of question as before. So Gemara says Haksiv lo tetzei ketzei savadim. But it says she doesn't leave like other slaves, and we wanted to use that to say that she doesn't leave like other slaves, but she's acquired like other slaves, i.e., through a contract. Marisa says, well, what like why would you choose one over the other? Why would you choose the um, the idea that she can be married through a star over the idea that she can be married through chazaka? Like, the Torah doesn't say which one it's excluding, so you have to choose one. Why would you choose one over the other? So the answer is mistabra, because it makes sense. Star havalela rabuye. It's if the Torah is going to include something, it makes sense that what it's including is marriage by contract. Sheken mosia b'vas Yisrael, because a star, a contract, in this case a get, is strong enough um, to affect the dissolution of a marriage to a regular free person, a free woman. Um, so, so I would think that shar has something to do with it, has that strength to dissolve a marriage. So it makes sense to say the shar has the strength to affect the marriage. So I said, you could say the opposite. No, chazaka is stronger than shtar because chazaka can acquire the possessions of a ger. So if a ger, just an example of someone who has no family, right? Because a person who converts, his non-Jewish family is not halachically considered his family. So if he dies without any relatives, then anybody can acquire that property through chazaka, right? So if chazaka is strong enough to affect that kind of kinyan, that kind of acquisition, so maybe that's the kind, and that's the only way you can acquire nichsei ger. So maybe that indicates that it's a stronger type of kinyan, and that should be the one that acquires or affects the marriage of the Yom Ivriya. So Gemara answers beishus mias lo ashkacha. No, we're talking about marriage here. Okay, so don't bring in property rights. If you're talking about marriage, then we see that the model for things that affect marriage is a star, i.e., a get. Therefore, we would apply that idea of a star to the marriage as well, rather than bring in something from property rights, rather than bring in chazaka as a proof or as the model. Or you could say, that's what the Torah is telling you when it says imacheres yikachlo. If he takes someone else, that kind of indicates that we should interpret the pasuk lo tetzei as like as the one that is indicating that it is a star that we're talking about. Rav Huna, what about Rav Huna? He's got a different source. So what does he do with that pasuk? You know how she doesn't go out? Like she doesn't go out like a servant goes out, like a male servant goes out. A male servant is freed if the master causes him to lose a limb, then he is immediately freed. Right? That does not apply, according to Rav Huna, to a woman, to a female servant. Rav Chisda. Okay, well, so doesn't Rav Chisda agree with that? So where does he get it from if he's not getting it from lo tetzei ketzei savadim? Okay, likro lo tetzei ka'avadim. That's a longer phrase, right? It could say she should not go out like slaves, like male slaves. My ketzei savadim, like the leaving of slaves, that extra word. Shmami natarti, that's how you can learn both of them. Okay. Next thing in the Mishnah, the Eved Ivri, he acquires his freedom after 6 years. This is a verse in the Torah. You work 6 years, and then the 7th year you're done. And by Yovel, and also he goes out at the Yovel year when it comes around. He works, he serves you until the Yovel year. Also Begir on Kesef, also through working off his debt, right? If the debt that he sold himself into is, or that he was sold into by the court is a sum that is basically like 2 years of labor, then he's free after 2 years of labor. Amar Chizkiah says, the Amakra, the source for this is the Hefta. Um, that she becomes redeemed. Like this, this word indicates that once you've paid off the debt that got you into the servitude in the first place, once you've worked enough to pay off that debt, then you're off the hook, then you're free, which makes sense. We have another brisa. The servant goes free through money, shava kesef, something of value, ubishtar, and with a contract, a document. Bishlam kesef, so I understand why money works to receive mikesef miknasa. The Torah says, if there's a lot of years left in the term, he has to repay his redemption. So okay, so that makes it clear that that money is what gets him into the it gets him out of servitude. Shava kesef name, and something that's of value. Yashiv gulas omar achmana, because the Torah says he should repay his the money for his redemption. Rabbi shava kesef kekesef, it's including something of value. But where do you get the idea that he can be freed through a document? What are we talking about? A document? If you're talking about like an IOU document, right? That I owe you, $5,000 in return for my freedom. So that's shava kesef, or that is kesef. I do kesef. Like that's the same as paying cash. A promissory note would be the same. So we're talking about a document that just says you're free, right? A shichur, a emancipation document. Shtar lamali. What do you even need a document? The master should just say to him with two witnesses, Zil, you're free. What do you need the shtar for? Inami bapi bedina, or Zil, or do it before two witnesses or a court. So then he's like giving up his rights to the person, his monetary rights, which he can do verbally. What do you need the shtar for? Rava says, you know what? This tells you that it's not just a monetary obligation. There's a how to put this, it's an ownership interest, right? The master has an ownership interest. He has an ownership interest. If you just waive your rights, your monetary rights, that doesn't get you off the ownership rights. That has to be done through a document, if not through the exchange of money, as we saw before. You can't just declare it. Okay, Yisera Alav Amahibria. So the Mishnah said there that a female servant has an extra that has an advantage over the male servant in that there's another way that she can be redeemed when she ages out, right? If she's sold as a minor, then once she achieves the age of majority, 12 and a half, then she becomes free that way, which does not apply to a man. All right, Shlakish. Rish Lakish says, you know what? There's another way not mentioned in the Mishnah. If the father who sold her into servitude dies, then she's free. And how do I know this? Kal b'chomer, a logical inference. If you have maturity, right? If she ages out, she doesn't. So recall that the stages of maturity, you start as a minor, and then you reach the age of 12, and you become a nara, and then with the appearance of simanim, physical signs of maturity, which is usually taken to mean 2 pubic hairs, then you become a bogeris. You become fully independent. So when do you leave the domain of your father. The woman leaves the domain of her father um, at the point of when she becomes a nara, right? And that sorry, not when she becomes a nara. That's when she turns 12, but she still needs the two hairs, right? The physical maturity. So just by turning 12, she doesn't leave um, the domain of her father, um, but she does leave the domain of her master, right? She gets out of the servitude. But Misa Shemotzia Mershus of, but the but if the father dies, right, uh, then obviously the father has no jurisdiction over her, right, because he's dead. And Adin Shemotzia Mershus of, so that certainly should remove her from the jurisdiction of the master. So Meisvei Rav Hoshaya says, no, Yisera Lava Ivriya, Shekonas Asma B'Simanim. Our Mishnah said that she is freed by her size and maturity. Nisa, if there is another way, i.e., the father's death, Nisa Misa. Why doesn't the Mishnah list that? Right? The fact that the Mishnah doesn't list the death of the father as a way for the affecting the freedom of the daughter of the servant means that it's not the way that you get that she gets free. So Gemara says ton of Bashir. Okay, maybe this is obviously. I mean, frequently the Gemara uses this. Like maybe the list is not exhaustive. Maybe the Mishnah left things out, and really this is the death of the father is indeed a way for for the for the woman to be free. Now, the rule for leaving something out is my share to high share. You can't just leave out one thing, right? If there is a something left out, there has to be several things left out. If you only leave out one thing, you can't. The Gemara always says, no, you can't. Then that means it's not part of the list. If there's only one thing that is excluded, then that's really excluded. It's not just left out of the list. So more answers. Shiarmi says, "Oh, you know what else is left out? The master dies. The master dies, then she's out, and that's not listed either." So Gemara says, "No, you can't use that. If that's what was also left out, lav shiruhu. That's not a leaving out. Kevan deika name beish lokatane, because that's not something that's different than a man, right? If the master dies, then a male servant also gets freed. Um, so so that wouldn't be part of the list anyway, right? So again, we're back to having if this is the only thing left out, then it's not left out. It means it's excluded. Velanisne. So what? Um, so again, like it should have if Reish Lakish is right that the death of the father frees the girl, then it should have been listed in the Mishnah. So the answer is Tana Davar Sheyesh Lo Kitzva Katane, Davar She'en Lo Kitzva Lo Katane. You know why it's left out of the list? Because the Mishnah was only counting things that have a set time. Like we know when it's going to happen. Obviously, you don't know when the father is going to die. That's a surprise, right? Basimanim Da'ilam Kitzva. But wait a minute. You don't know when she's going to become mature either, and it listed that. So you can't say that it's only listing things that we don't know when they are. Rav Safra is Elam Kitzva Lamal, Yeshlem Kitzva Limata. Okay, what we're talking about is what the Mishnah includes is only things that that we know the upper limit. Like we know that by a certain time she's going to mature, but we don't know it could happen sooner, right? Same thing with the father, right? It's or with the father, like we okay, there's a lower limit for, as we will see, the Gemara will explain. Um, there's a lower limit for when maturity can happen, but there's no lower limit for when the father could die. He could die at any time. Let's see what we're talking about here. The Tanya. The Brisa says, Ben Tesha Shanim Shehevi Shtei Saros. So you have a 9-year-old that shows signs of maturity by growing 2 pubic hairs. Shuma, then we consider that, he's only 9. It's probably not a sign of maturity. He's probably, he has hair growing because of a mole, okay, or some other, some other reason other than physical maturity is why he's growing these 2 hairs. Mi ben Teshanim V'yom Echad Ad ben Yud Beishanim V'yom Echad. So from If these hairs show up after he's 9 years old, so 9 years old in the day until 12 in the day, Viodanbo, and they're still there when he's 12. In other words, they don't fall off. Shuma, then again, we consider that those are not hairs of maturity; those are hairs of some other kind of growth. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Sima. Rabbi Yossi says no, that is a sign of maturity. Ben Yud Gimel Shana V'Yom Echad, but if he grows these hairs from after his 13th birthday, Tirei Kol Sima. Everybody says these are hairs of maturity. So what's the point of this? That there is a lower limit. Like, something that happens before 9 years old, that doesn't count, right? So there is a certain time period that's known in advance when this is when this is a thing, right? Whereas the death of the father is obviously there's no lower limit. He could die at any time, just as excuse me, excuse me, just as anyone could die at any time. So there is no known limit when that could happen, and that's why the Mishnah lists only, since it's listing only things that have a limit, it lists the maturity, but it doesn't list the death of the father, even though that is indeed a way for the girl to be freed when her father dies. Nonetheless, it's not in the Mishnah's list because it's not something that has a fixed time. Masi Rav Sheshes house. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Arba Manikin Lahem, Gimel B'Ishu, Gimel B'Isha. Rav Shimon says there are four severance categories of severance payment. Three apply to a man and three apply to a woman. But there aren't. But either a man or a woman doesn't have all four categories applied to them. Because a man does not go free when on maturity. And a woman can't be the idea of ritzua of piercing the ear and staying on doesn't apply to her. V'nisa. So if it's true that there's another way for her to go free, which is her father's death, nisin ami misasav, then there is a fourth way. There is a fourth way for a woman to get severance, right? Which is if her father dies. And if you want to say, okay, so here too, there's only the Mishnah is not being precise in the list. It's not doing the full list. Well, our book, Tommy. Well, wait a minute. Second, get my battery back on here. But the Mishnah says a specific number. It says four. Like it says there aren't four ways for a woman, but here's a fourth way, right? So it's not a question of just a list and is it complete. It's saying there's there aren't four, and here there are four. Maybe you want to say, okay, so there's only three ways for the woman to get emancipation if we're only counting things with that have a fixed time. It's not talking about things that don't have a fixed time, like the death of the father, as we just saw earlier. But what about maturity? Maturity is one of the ways that the Mishnah counts, and that doesn't have a fixed time. So you want to answer like we answered before, that there's a fixed that there is a fixed lower limit, even though there's no fixed upper limit. But what about the death of the master? Right, that's just like the death of the father. There's no lower limit; he could die at any time, but katane, and it is included. So our answer is Misa Lokatane. Why don't we include Misa Sa'adon, the death of the master? It's not included. Okay, so there's another one, but it's not included in the count. But that doesn't make sense. Arba my new. So like, what are the four categories then? Shanim. So here are the four categories. Shanim, 6 years. Yovel, when the Yovel happens. The Yovel Shoritzia. Just a second. I need to plug in my phone. For some reason, the battery is not working here. Here we go. Bear with me a second. Okay. Well, um, okay, so there's what are the four ways that the Mishnah is saying the woman can get severance? Shanim, 6 years, Yovel, Yovel Shoritzia. There's also the person who gets their ear pierced for a second term, but still goes free at Yovel. And a woman goes free with maturity. So and that makes sense to Katani Seifa because Brisa continues. You can't say there are four for a man or four for a woman. There's only three. So that fits with our list. Now, if it's the case that the master's death is should be included, there would be four. So that's how we get that the death of the it's just saying that the death of the master is not included in the Mishnah's list. Okay, but it's still unclear to me, like, why not? And you would have to say the why not is because it's not included because it's something that has no fixed time, like the other ones do. Okay. Masi Rav Amram asks, here's another brisa that says, here's who gets severance. Hayose b'shanim, someone who leaves after 6 years. Beyovel, someone who leaves at the Yovel. Misa Sadam, here we have specifically listed the death of the master. And a woman is freed when she matures. Misa, so if it's true that she's also freed when the father dies, why isn't it listed? It should be listed in this brisa. And if you want to say, okay, so it's not an exhaustive list, the Mishnah uses the word, these are the ways. He uses the word, these are the ways that something happens. In this case, the severance pay. Then that means that this is a full list. You can't say Tanavishir. Maybe you want to say that, yeah, it's a full list of things that have no limit, have no fixed time, excuse me. But it did include maturity, which has no fixed time. And it is included. Maybe you want to answer like we answered before with Rav Safra, that yes, it has no fixed upper limit, but it has a fixed lower limit. Well, what about the death of the master, which is included here, which is there's no fixed time for it. So okay, so that is a good question, and the wind up is that yes, the death of the father does not free the female servant. But wait, Reish Lakish had a logical device, right? He said he proved it from a kal v'chomer from simanim, right? From maturity, because like maturity removes her from the father's domain, right? And it removes her from the master's domain as well. So simanim which do not remove her from the father's domain, but they do remove her from the master's domain. So what about the death of the father, which certainly removes her from the father's domain, should also remove her from the master's domain. So isn't that a good kal v'chomer? So kal v'chomer pricha. You could find fault in that kal v'chomer. Mishum deikal mifrach. Mal simanim shenishtana haguf. Tomer misav sheken lo nishtana haguf. The maturity is a change in the person herself, the servant that we're talking about. So maybe that's why it is strong enough to remove her from the master. But the death of the father, which doesn't have anything to do directly with the servant herself, maybe you could say that that is not something that can remove her from her servitude. Okay. Now, Tani Chada, we have one brisa, Enek Eved Ivri Latzma. Who gets the money, the severance money? The person himself, right? The servant himself. Anak Ama Ivri Latzma. And the same for a man, same for a woman. The Tiny Idach, we have another brisa, Anak Ama Ivri Mitziasa Liavia. That who gets the things that the female servant gets, and this refers to the anek, the severance pay, and also the mitzia, something that she finds. So if she finds something that is not in the course of her work, then her father gets to keep it because she's still somewhat under the domain of her father. So we have conflicting sources. If she finds something on her way, she gets to keep it. The only rights that her master has is in the time it took her to pick up and look after this object. So he has to be paid for the time that was lost to his that was used for her own purposes, right? But the mitzvah itself, the thing that she found, goes to her father anyway. The point is that these are two conflicting sources. In one case, we say the severance pay goes to the woman herself, and in the other one, we say that the severance pay goes to the father. So Gemara says, "Lo." Sorry, I skipped something. So Gemara says, "My love, hadanafka b'simanim v'hadanafka love misasav." Maybe if we go back to the idea that the second brisa is talking about where she leaves the master through her maturity, and so she goes back to her father because she's still a minor. So that's why the father keeps the severance. But when she leaves because the father died, well, there is no father, so obviously, who else is going to get she's not under the jurisdiction of her father because the father is dead, right? So Gemara says, no, there's another way to reconcile these two brisas. We're talking about both cases where she gets her severance because she aged out. You know what? Maybe her father was already dead when she began the servitude. Okay, so that is not something that got her out of the servitude, right? And so who gets the severance? Well, if her father is still alive, then he gets it. But if he was dead to begin with, then she gets it. Bishlama enek ama ivriel atzma. Okay, so I understand why, if there's no father, the woman gets the severance herself. Fine. Lemute achim. Why is it telling us that? She gets it and not her brothers. Tanya, why would I think her brothers get it? You pass on the rights to your Eved Kanani to your children after you. You know who your sons can inherit? They can inherit the Eved Kanani, but not the Ama Ivriya, their sister, who was sold into servitude. The brothers don't get the rights to their sister on the death of the father. So maybe that's why we have to be told that she gets it herself, right? To let you know that the brothers don't have any rights to the severance. But when it comes to a man, pshita, like who else is going to get it, right? Who else is going to get the severance for when a Eved Ivri is freed? There's no havamina to think that somebody else, like his brothers, would get it. Rav Yosef Yud Keres Kachazina Hacha. I see a small yud which has been made into a big city. In other words, yes, the brisa could have been a lot briefer. It could have said it could have left out the idea that an Eved Ivri gets to keep his own severance, but it just was expansive in its wording. But Abaye said, Abaye Amar Hachi Amar Sheshes, where Sheshes says, Hamani to Taihu, who is the Who said this brisa? Tutai. Tanya, Tutai Omer, Tutai says, Lo v'lo balchovo. You know who doesn't get the severance? A creditor of the freed slave. Okay, the freed slave, he has, this is something that's not, that is not subject to debt collection by somebody else. Okay. Gufa. Let's see, we're going to go on a little bit. Let's go and turn the page. Gufa. We had the list of people who get severance. Hayosef B'Shanim, 6 years, completed the term of 6 years. Uba Yovel, or somebody who leaves at Yovel. Uvmi Sasadon, or the master dies. And a female servant who ages out. But you know who doesn't get severance? Someone who escapes, right? Runaway. Basically, he hasn't completed his term, but he escapes. He certainly doesn't get severance. Or someone who pays off pays off the remaining years of his servitude, buys himself out of it. He doesn't get additional severance. Ramiro says, well, certainly someone who runs away, he doesn't get severance. But somebody who buys himself out, he does get severance. There's 4 categories who get severance. 3 apply to a man, 3 apply to a woman. You can't say that either a man or a woman fits into all 4 categories. There's no aging out for a man, and you don't have a woman who's doing a second term because of Ritzi. Okay, we'll stop here. Will we stop here? Yes, we'll stop here. No, we should let's go a little further because this is still related. Where do we get these laws from? Yeah, this is a good place to stop. Okay. David will pick this up tomorrow.